Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Strategy Reboot. Here's What I Was Wrong About, featuring Professor Sonia Marciano, which is taking place as part of Stern Reunion 2021. My name is Laura Gigliotti, and I am an Associate Director of Alumni Relations here at NYU Stern. And we are really excited to offer this program and reunion to you all virtually this year to all members of our alumni community. And we encourage you to attend as many sessions as you can over the course of the next few days. So before we get started, I just have a few quick housekeeping announcements. In terms of the flow of the next hour, Professor Marciano is going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then we will open it up during the last 10 minutes for Q&A. So please, as questions come up, please type them into the Q&A box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will do our best to get to those and address them towards the end of the presentation. And if you have any technical difficulties at any point during the presentation, you can feel free to email alumni@stern.nyu.edu. Again, that's alumni@stern.nyu.edu, and someone will get back to you promptly. I should also note that this session is being recorded, and it will be made available to you in the next few weeks. So as you may know, this session is offered as part of Stern's Lifelong Learning Initiative, which offers alumni access to the school's renowned faculty, such as Professor Marciano. And through this initiative, alumni are eligible to audit select graduate level classes at no cost. Yes, you did hear that correctly. And also receive discounts on our executive education and online certificate programs. So I encourage you to visit our website. There's a little flow chart here on how to do that, stern.nyu.edu. There's an alumni tab at the top, and there you'll see all of our resources and benefits, which include these lifelong learning opportunities. And I'll just do one quick plug for an upcoming course in mid-June. It's called Leadership for the 21st Century. It's all about how businesses can better align their purpose and profit. And there's lots of terrific faculty members who will be leading that course, including Bruce Buchanan, Nate Pettit, Tansy Whalen, and several others. So definitely check it out. As I mentioned, it's part of your lifelong learning benefits, and it's entirely complimentary. So with that, I'm very pleased to pass things over to Sonia Marciano, who is a clinical professor of management and organizations at NYU Stern, and she has a terrific presentation prepared for you tonight. So Sonia, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Laura. Well, the title, I have to live up to it, What I Was Wrong About. And I hope this makes a lot of you laugh. I think I was wrong about Netflix. Well, actually, I think I was wrong-ish about Netflix. Every term of advanced strategy, students would propose Netflix for their project, and I'd be the quintessential wet blanket and very negative. And to be fair, however, I was in very decent company. I'm going to talk about Warren Buffett and his proverbial toll bridge for a minute. So what I'm going to do for the next couple slides is just reintroduce you to some of the ways we talked about companies in advanced strategy. And if you didn't take the course, you're going to get the 3-minute version of it, which I think is pretty good too. So Warren Buffett's proverbial toll bridge. And by the way, Warren Buffett never invested in Netflix and has no intention of investing in Netflix. And so he has this kind of description through this toll bridge of the ideal business model. And the way he describes it is as follows, that you imagine two land masses, and the firm is actually the toll bridge. The firm connects two land masses. The firm makes this big fixed sunk investment at time zero to build the bridge. And the second bridge, a second bridge, would generate very little incremental value. So in that way, the investment the firm makes should discourage subsequent investment. And so we imagine getting some sort of market to yourself. I hope you remember we called this in class peeing in the pool, kind of ruining the market for this second mover. The firm's returns on its investment grow as activity and exchange among and within these two islands increases. So we have here on one island, we have houses and nice shops to shop at. And then on the other island, that's where your job is and where there's some good entertainment. And so we imagine there's just lots of reasons to keep crossing this bridge. If inflation occurs, the firm can increase the price of the tolls. So you earn in today's dollars, even though you made your CapEx in old dollars. And Warren Buffett says, owning a toll bridge enables you to earn a royalty on the growth of others while requiring relatively little capital itself. And that's kind of the vision. So if we take this as the ideal, right? You make this big fixed investment at time zero, and then what you are monetizing is actually a lot of the investments made by others. We can add this to the kind of picture of all and the total enterprise value. And the total enterprise value is this scarcity value described by Warren Buffett. And then we're going to combine it with two other concepts. And one is scalability, right? So how much can the company grow without having to increase its capital expenditures, without having to increase more capital? And then how much does it have sort of natural scale economies? And then the third component we really love is scopability. And that's when you take the scarcity value, your so-called toll bridge, and you can deploy it in many geographic markets, and you can deploy it in many product markets. So I'm going to give you an example of each of these things. I'm going to start with scalability and scopability, and kind of a different example because not all of us are in traditional businesses. So I thought I would point out that there's this theater in Chicago that has deployed scalability and scopability, and they've done it in an analog universe. So what you're going to see in 50 seconds is how this theater has kind of overcome the constraint that is imposed on many who are in the field of live arts. And that's the inability to find the right theater for the right project at the right time. And what they've done is created a morphable theater. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So that is scalability and scopability, two very good adjectives you'd like described about your company. Another example I'll throw out is what Disney's done recently. Of course, they're not able to enjoy it these days, but they realized that at their parks, there were about 4 times as many people that wanted to eat lunch as could get a reservation. So they developed the Magic Band. I'm very sure some of you have already experienced it. But when you make your lunch reservation, you order your meal, and that means you get to your reservation, you sit down, your food is ready, and they can seat so many more people. So scalability is a natural byproduct of your production process and kind of the industry, but it also is engineered. And the same thing with scopability. You can engineer yourself to be able to more profitably compete in multiple geographies and in multiple product markets. So we're going to think about the first one first, scarcity. And the example I'm going to use is from the old days. It's the newspaper value chain. And I'm going to shamelessly borrow from Ben Thompson's website, Strategery, because so many of you write to me and say, have you seen Strategery? It's great. And so I want to confirm, yes, I listened to you. I have. And so here's what's going on. This is a great toll bridge. And here's why. There are these editors and authors and writers, and they all kind of provide services for the newspaper. The newspaper takes years to develop credibility. It takes a long time to become a credible purveyor of facts. Papers own their own printing presses and trucks, and they have distribution capabilities. For decades, including the 1990s, a handful of papers, fewer than 5, had over 50% of the market. And in the past 2 decades, 2 papers have actually increased their share, and they've increased their subscriber base. Specifically, papers who invested in credibility have taken share. So newspapers are an example of defendable scarcity value. You can be the bridge between creative content and end customers, and these assets and capabilities that make up the bridge, they have a really long shelf life, and we like this. So newspapers, old school, new school example of defendable scalability. Newspapers have been, by the way, a Buffett-approved toll bridge since the 1960s. He's had 1 or more newspapers in his portfolio, so he likes this asset. Now, why I was always such a wet blanket? Well, because Netflix sort of fails in many ways, the toll bridge test, or it did in years past. So this is, again, another picture lifted from Ben Thompson, only I had to edit it because he left off streaming infrastructure, which is a pretty important part of the toll bridge. So here's what's going on here. What I didn't like, why I was such a wet blanket. Netflix is invested in content creation, as you know, and many of you espoused it as a good idea. But the industry, creative content or content creation, it has a serious concentration problem. It's actually a concentration problem inside of a concentration problem. You've got 3 studios are 80% of the market. So when you're in this business, you're negotiating oftentimes with incredibly powerful entities. And these powerful entities, they negotiate with very powerful entities. A handful of writers, actors, directors that earn the vast majority of wages. It's the quintessential Shonda Rhimes problem, that she's just such an impressive writer that you just pay so much to transact with her. So when we look at Netflix, they're choosing these 2 parts of the value chain: content creation, which is very, very rugged. It's a very tough industry. And then customer acquisition, which is also rugged. You have to get customers to sign up, et cetera. And then in terms of the streaming infrastructure part, we like the word infrastructure. We liked it when we talked about newspapers. We love that you need a printing press and that you needed an analog distribution system. But here the word infrastructure isn't nearly as exciting. Where were you in 2004? You were probably in kindergarten. So I was conscious during 2004 and 2005. And that's another reason I was a wet blanket, because I remember that Blockbuster launched a streaming service, Toll Bridge, and it was a near clone of what Netflix had done, only it had a bigger library. And it had this same amount of customer data absorption. It was truly a clone. And if you were, old enough to sort of look at it, you'd be like, oh, Netflix sucks because Netflix doesn't have as much content. And this Blockbuster site looks really, really great. It is actually to this day a mystery why Blockbuster shut that site down. And it's a mystery to the people who initiated this site and ran it. It just looked like not a good move. So then I pressed students and I'm like, all right, so tell me what Netflix's special powers are. What's so great about Netflix that you want to make this the focus of your project? And so they say things like, well, they spend billions of dollars on content. Now, what you see as a plus, I see as a minus. They spend 12 times what HBO spends on content. You say they have a 28-acre production center, that they have their own studio. Like, again, what you see is a plus, I see as a minus. And they have bragging rights. 89 Oscar nominations since 2014 and 15 wins. Got it. Relationship capital with studios. See, these are all things I'm going to show you are not altogether pluses. What they can do, and this is what you say, they know who's watching what, and they use this data to determine how much each piece of content is worth. That I completely agree with. They could look at existing content and say what it's worth. They have developed algorithms. And the key algorithm was actually an algorithm that was really useful when they were shipping CDs out to people. So they could tell what was watched where, and that where was what they used to put down these distribution centers. Any other e-commerce company would love to have such granular data on who is demanding what where, so they could put down the analog assets that could make e-commerce actually profitable. And yeah, this is true that Netflix can spread their content cost over tens of millions of users. All of these things are true. And they do, I believe, know how to encourage addiction. They can tailor your homepage, and they have all kinds of other gimmicks that make you swear you're only going to watch one episode and then 3 episodes later. But here's my big but. But up until Disney left Netflix, content from NBC Universal, Disney, Fox, and Warner Brothers accounted for 2/3 of Netflix viewing hours. What does this say about Netflix's added value? I think it says that all of this data and all of this algorithms, right? They never cracked like the magic, the place you'd really like the magic is predicting the future, not having the ability to highly interpret the past. And on these 89 Oscar nominations, every single movie that you campaign for cost you between 20 and 30 million. And that's over and above your production cost. So you spend umpteen on production. We'll look a little bit at that. And then you spend another 25 million promoting the movie to get an Oscar nomination. Honestly, I'm not even sure what the there is. So I whined that all I saw was window dressing, and all of this window dressing really wasn't translating into profitability. In fact, and I had my Netflix slide ready for you. This is awful. Honestly, Maersk Shipping has a better looking graph than Netflix, and nobody ever offered to do shipping in my class for obvious reasons. Between 2002 and 2006, Netflix mailed DVDs to subscribers, making brick and mortar rental stores obsolete. And they got better and better at it because they kept putting better and better distribution assets down. And then in 2007, Netflix begins streaming. And the cash squeezed due to financial crisis-driven recession company Starz gives Netflix its whole library. And this just can't be emphasized enough. Their whole library for $25 million a year. That is quite literally the deal of the century, as you can see from what happens when the deal expires. So what you're seeing during these years where Netflix actually was profitable is a byproduct of the collision of the financial crisis with a content company that was pretty desperate for cash. And so they took this deal, 25 million per year. And then when the deal expires, Netflix just feels nothing but gravity. Starz increases the price to $300 million. And suddenly it doesn't look so good anymore. So we're back to this supplier power on steroids, just not such a great business. And then Netflix starts making original content. And again, this is where you come to me and you're like, but they're making their own content, so there's no supplier power. And I say, well, it doesn't really work that way. So let's just keep this in mind because it's still true. Since the third quarter of 2012, Netflix has been destroying about $278 million of economic profit per year. And that's kind of real money. All right. But then you're like, okay, but look at this. This is Netflix paid subscribers, 30% CAGR. Like, how do you not get very compelled by a 30% CAGR? I hear you, 30% CAGR. But I would whine about this. This is Netflix content spend. And this also is increasing by a 30% CAGR. And so in a way, I'm like, you say 30% increase in subscribers, and I just see a 30% increase in already an unbelievably big number. This is original content investments up to and including July 2020. And here's all the others. And that is just a massive amount. That is just a bonfire of money. I'm sorry. And also just to update you, Netflix just purchased the rights to 2 Knives Out for $400 million. Like, what is that? That is just the right to make sequels. Also, quality. So they've got all this data. But they are good at getting us to watch it anyway, but it isn't particularly high quality content, right? So this would be its share of TV shows rated with an 8-point or higher IMDb score. And there's Netflix over here with 10% of their content. And let's just compare them to HBO. HBO spends way less to earn an Emmy than Netflix does. Netflix spends $500 million to win an Emmy. HBO spends $74 million to win an Emmy. Netflix has 1 in 10 of their shows with an IMDb score of 8 or higher, and HBO has 1/4 of their shows. So what I see is a bonfire of money when I look at this. I don't see this magical claim that their data produces a crystal ball. What I do see is their data produces an ability for them to master the present. They can absolutely see what is true right now. They can't see the future, and the future would be really, really compelling. So Netflix, I think, appears inferior at making hits and controlling supplier power, but they're good at getting us to watch it anyway because they use algorithms to match you with what is available, and they're really good at exploiting their knowledge of addiction. So that's where I was at constantly. And then this really great team of Sternies took on Netflix, and they took on my incredibly bad attitude. And they did it this past spring. So we go around the room. What are you doing? Check. What are you doing? Check. And this team's like, Netflix. I'm like, Netflix sucks. Netflix is just like a good product. And then my also line would be, you know what? Nobody's going to wish on their deathbed that they watched more Netflix. Like, so even as a product, like, watch your P's and Q's. But this team was undaunted, so that we're doing Netflix. And I want to show you what happened. This team was nuanced. I super appreciated that. I actually learned from that. And what they said is, we do like Netflix, but we hate the market structure. So they gave me a shout out right from the beginning. So they set up a comparison of toll bridges. And here's what they did. The toll bridge connects creatives like artists and writers and directors It connects creatives to viewers. And so that's the proverbial toll bridge. And the toll bridge takes an ecosystem. It's not just one company, right? We got to have content made. We got to have customers acquired. And then there's the ISPs, and they're the ones that provide the infrastructure that makes it even possible to stream content. There's hardware, and then ultimately there's customers. And there's such a big range of how streamers are positioned in this market. Like there's HBO and there's NBC. And the thing they have going for them is they're integrated with the ISPs. We have these integrated media companies, and they don't have to tussle in the way others do they don't have to tussle, at least in all markets, to get access to their customer. And so what they can tell their customers, just buy one of these Roku thingies or anything that makes your TV smart, and then we're just going to go right to you. And then there's these two other players, and Amazon has a streaming service, and they actually don't even need you to get a Roku. And then there's Apple. And so what they were willing to admit is when you look at these four players, you got kind of a good setup. And then before we get to Netflix, let's just think about Disney. So Disney isn't part of a media conglomerate that's integrated with an ISP, a so-called internet service provider, but it's Disney. As we always say in business school, we need like a special different way of treating Disney, because here's the thing, Disney's content has organic demand. It is unusually attractive content. In other words, they know their customer, or maybe their customer is so easy to know because so much of their customer base is so young. Disney's content is great. And as a result, they can negotiate not just your garden variety deal with Verizon, but something that actually qualifies as a partnership. So while Disney isn't part of a conglomerate integrated with the ISP, Disney's content is special. They have a lot of organic demand for their content. And then there's Netflix. And Netflix is integrated into content, which is, by the way, a pretty shitty business. And then they're really good at customer acquisition. You're right, really good at it. But they got to deal with these ISPs, and these ISPs are separate companies. And they got to deal with the ISPs to get their customer good access so that streaming is a good experience. And I would say that Netflix doesn't qualify as being in any partnerships in the US, but they have like relationships, if you know what I mean. So I don't know if I could make a Tinder joke here, but I won't. But you know what I'm thinking, right? So it's like eHarmony and Tinder, not the same thing. All right. So I like this. They said, we like Netflix, but we hate the market structure. And so already this is a nuanced view of Netflix, which I really appreciate. And actually, I really learned from. So in addition, we also have to worry about the hardware makers, including and not limited to Apple, which now has its own streaming service. And you might remember some of the period in which Netflix got the most aggressive signups. That was when Apple optimized its iPad for Netflix, and we'll see how that continues in the future. But there are these hardware providers, and some of them are integrated into streaming services themselves. And certainly it gets really rugged when we think about this whole ecosystem and who's a collaborator and who's a contributor and who's a complementer. And this thing is very confusing. And what this team admitted was Netflix isn't the streaming service that we'd say is necessarily best positioned when we look at it this way. But the team wondered, and I had never had a team point this out, they said something happened in 2017. And we believe markets are efficient. And we believe the market. And we think the market noticed that Netflix pulled away from the pack. And this is a very provocative picture because the market, like me and like Warren Buffett, didn't think Netflix was all that and more. And then all of a sudden, the market was like, oops, we got to take another look. And so we need to take another look, the team said. And so what did the team find? The team discovered that Netflix predicted that there was a bandwidth constraint in international markets. And they noticed this early on, and they actually developed a response that they dubbed Netflix Open Connect. So they went into these markets where there were ISP constraints, so that streaming would be like a pretty bad experience for all streamers, whatever site they were streaming. And what Netflix installed were what they call these open content appliances. And they install these things. Now, this starts to become infrastructure that, if you know me, that word really rocks my boat. Again, think printing presses, and I own a distribution system, and I own trucks, and I have this distribution footprint. So it's really hard for you to get your newspaper in the business. Now what we have is Netflix actually installing its own infrastructure inside of all of these ISPs. Netflix paid for this, and they're servicing this infrastructure free of charge to the ISP. So now the ISP is actually getting their boat floated. Some of these are government entities, and they're like, hey, Netflix, thanks for the free stuff. And so, of course, now Netflix is getting preferential treatment. The infrastructure reduces the overall demand on local ISP upstream network capacity by several orders of magnitude. And Netflix gets locked in because they're like, hey, you don't mind if we put our content on this hardware where it's super ready to be teed up and served up to the local market. What Netflix did that is just really Tollbridge-like is Netflix made relationships out of the ISPs in markets where they had the latitude to be complementers. And they gave so many key ISPs every reason to be especially supportive of Netflix as a streaming service. And that is actually Tollbridge-y. And so I was like eating my words. Netflix additionally is building a global workforce. And the team noted an 850% increase in Netflix's rest of world headcount between 2005 and 2020, with most of it accelerated past 2012. So they're really setting themselves up to be the absolute best streaming experience outside of the US. And the team went further and showed that their profitability outside of the US is growing at a really, really impressive rate. And again, this looks Tollbridge-like. Netflix is connecting global customers to global content. And that is super interesting. On the one hand, the 2020 paid global subscribers, right? So I just put this together, looking it up. This is all public information. Netflix has 208 million global subscribers. But Amazon Prime is up there with 117. So if you attended Scott Galloway's event last year, this gap was way bigger. Netflix was like 3 times bigger than the second biggest streaming service. And now it's less than twice as big. However, it towers. It towers over the rest. No question about it. By the way, last year, Disney was in like the 10 range. And so they've increased tenfold. But Statista reports the following, that as of now, streaming is anyone's game. And so this is projections into the near future based on their surveys of customer sentiment. And so the blue line is Disney, which they actually estimate could pass Netflix within a few years. And then we have Amazon Prime. So I just bolded the three that are like the ones to watch. Amazon Prime, Disney, and Netflix look like they could really be, well, life could get really rugged among the three of them. So I think it's really appropriate to quote a filmmaker here, Albert Maysel. He said, "Tyranny is the deliberate removal of no nuance." I love that quote. I think there's so many things we could apply that quote to. And I'm going to apply it to my attitude towards Netflix for 2008 to 2019, before I met this team. I was pretty tyrannical in my pessimism about Netflix. Netflix's strong incentives and available capital, I should not have underestimated. So you can look at a business model at a point in time, and you can see that there's a flaw with it. And it looks to me like a static problem, like that this business model is bad. But when you've got a company that has so much capital available to it and such strong incentives to survive, you should actually I should be more concerned with the dynamic. They have a ton of capital, and that it enables Netflix to seek and find toll bridge opportunities. And clearly, the leaders get it, as evidenced by what they did globally. So that's really good news, that the toll bridge and the idea of defendable scarcity and a production process that's scalable and the dream of taking your idea global and to many product markets, they're on the same page. Also makes sense because they do have a few Stern alum over there. So access to capital. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, a CAGR. This is Netflix's revenues from 2002 to 2020. We're looking at a CAGR of over 100%. Okay, so I get it. Like, we want to take a deep dive. But there is nuance. There's a ton of nuance here. And another Warren Buffett quote, "When a manager with a reputation for brilliance tackles a business with a reputation for poor fundamental economics, it is the reputation of the business that remains intact." I love that. Netflix operates in an ecosystem with friends, enemies, and frenemies, and these roles are constantly evolving. I mean, there is nothing that's standing still. In one quarter, that is your supplier, that is your friend. In another quarter, that friend has become your enemy, and then eventually your frenemy, and that's only if you work really hard. So on one end, we have the value added, right? This is the top of the chain, and the folks that are, and these are folks that have agents and they aren't ownable, and this is top. And on the other end, we have the ISPs. So Netflix has content providers on one side, ISPs on the other side. They're the bottom of the chain, and they're vital, of course, and they're very concentrated, and many of them are entering the business. So as I see it, Netflix life is super complicated. They are squeezed in between these two ends, and they're squeezed, and they have a ton of cash, and they're really smart, and it's very nuanced. So I thought I would just kind of brag for a minute about my advanced strategy students from this year. And this isn't a very pretty slide, but I mean, the content is priceless. In January of 2020, students picked a project. And this is the list of the projects chosen in that spring term. And in March of 2020, we were all in lockdown. And we were all in lockdown. And I noted the price difference between the stock when they chose it and the price during lockdown. And then I asked my students by email to tell me if they thought COVID was a depressant or an accelerant for their projects. And for some of these, the students said it was not a plus. And those would be the stocks that were maybe a little bit down here. But there were a lot of students, like my students who covered the Gap. They said, I think it's going to be an accelerant because people are going to have to buy clothes. And the Gap is a really good name. And we think they're really doing a lot to improve their operations. So even though they're taking a hit, we think they have great prospects. And look at what's happened since. So if I look at the projects that students in this course choose, by contemplating, like, how does this business compare to the proverbial toll bridge? Is it one of those businesses where you build the bridge and then it needs hardly any maintenance, it needs hardly any repairs, the price goes up with inflation, and you're literally free riding on the work of others? When they take that lens and they break down the scarcity, how good of a toll bridge, they explain the degree of scalability, how much of it is a natural byproduct of the product, and how much of that scalability is just ingenuity, like Disney's Magic Band, ingenious way to scale restaurants. And then finally, how adept is this firm at competing globally and at competing in multiple product markets at this same time. And they make such an amazing selection out of all the publicly traded firms they could choose from. They choose this handful. And what I want to point your attention at is how well my students outperform the market. So this portfolio, not even excluding the ones that they were worried about, including all of it, this portfolio grew 120% relative to the S&P, which increased 62%. So that makes me, well, very proud of you all. So thanks to the best job ever, which is I get to be challenged by people like you for a living. I keep my nuance on the front burner. That's like the new me. I won't be nearly as wet blanket-like. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. So awesomely happy to have had this time with you. Even though it's all digital, I still am so glad to have been part of your day. I look forward to an analog catch-up sometime. Would love to see you audit my course one day in the future. And I would love to hear any questions that you've put in the chat.
Terrific. Thank you, Professor Marciano. That was wonderful. We do have a lot of questions that have come in, so I will start at the top. Daniel asks, what are your thoughts on Roku's entry into the content creation space with their recent acquisition of the Quibi library and rebranding as Roku Originals? What can they do to be successful while bridging content creation and owned hardware?
Well, all right, so now I got to be a wet blanket again. So I don't actually love Roku's place in the value chain because it's like such a basic utility with so many alternatives. You can buy a smart TV. I mean, if you're vaguely creative, you could probably like devise this device totally on your own. You could just get an Amazon Fire, et cetera, et cetera. There's something so appealing about being that sort of last inch of your streaming experience that there's too many people that want that real estate. So for Roku, it's a really rugged place to be. And I just have to tell you, like, content creation, ew, like, these are your suppliers. These are not suppliers you want to be dealing with when you want to yield net profitability. So I am not bullish on that idea. I do think that if you can generate cash, then making content is a way for the firm leaders to have a really, really good time and go to great parties and like go to awards and all that sort of stuff. But if I were capital, I would run for the hills.
Great. And on a similar note, do you think the audio streaming war is also anyone's game? Do Spotify and Apple have an advantage in terms of infrastructure?
I think Spotify has an advantage in terms of brain space. I think there are so many Spotify customers that have every reason to be very inertial and sort of stuck where they are. And then I think Apple is also interesting because of the way they can use their device to inclinate you to behave the way they want you to behave. I am just going based on impressions of industries that are analogous, that I think it's hard for me to imagine how you'd come in now as a streaming music provider and dislodge Spotify by being even more added value, or be ready to overcome Apple's resistance to you. So kind of think the streaming market is going to be tame for the foreseeable future. But again, totally intuition.
Great. Okay, another question here. Can you talk about your opinion on business social responsibility, shareholder value, and what you think the purpose of business should be today?
That is a great question. I am going to tell you that I am a strong, vocal, and aggressive advocate of capitalism for all its flaws. I say capitalism is like bread. Try living without it. I think as soon as we start introducing too many unverifiable objectives, non-quantifiable objectives, you start moving into a world where managers say, you just have to trust me that I'm doing the right thing. It can't be quantified, but take my word for it. And I think when we lose the ability to monitor and measure, especially people who lead companies, that's where we get into trouble. So my thought process is as follows. It is in the interest of people that want us to buy their products that they take into account the world we want to live in. And we want to live in a world that's very inclusive. We want to live in a world that elevates people. We want to live in a world that protects the environment. We want to live in a world where we don't have to think hard when we go to the grocery store that like the things on the shelf are good for us, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, I think it is already felt by people who run companies that they have to align with the world you want to live in the future. And I think the best path, instead of kind of just believing the words of leaders, I think the best path ever would be to think about how we could start quantifying and measuring the actions of companies and make those actions more transparent. And when there's transparency, how inclusive is your workforce? What's your carbon footprint? And so we have a lot of transparency on these things. We can incorporate them in our purchase decisions. And I think I just very much believe in the power of capitalism to make the world a better place. And so I'll just say something a little snarky. Just find me the people beating the door down to move to Cuba. Find me the people beating the door down to move to parts of China right now. I think what we hear on the news is we are still magnetically pulling people towards us because, like it or hate it, it is the best way to ascend individuals, give them access to a relatively well-functioning capitalist system.
Great. Okay, next question. Post-COVID, how do the Netflix and gaming firms hold on to their subscribers that they gained during the pandemic? Are movie theaters dead in the future?
So I hope they don't hold on to their viewers and their gamers. I'm just going to talk like, I used to warn you I did this, right? I'd like talk to you like your mother and sometimes your grandmother. I don't know, like all this time spent gaming, all this time spent watching Netflix and cannabis. I don't know if this is the path we want to be on. So again, I'll be nuanced, everything in moderation. Sometimes you need a cannabis gummy. Sometimes you just need to veg in front of Netflix. But I do think if you look at some of the viewing hours and some of the gaming hours you can find on Statista, I actually think it's alarming. So I would like to see streaming companies disgorged of some of their enterprise value, because it would be a sure sign that we were spending our time doing more productive things. I look at it this way. The more time we spend on these things, it's like a leading indicator for how shitty the future will be.
Great. Okay, a question here about Google. What about Google? YouTube and YouTube TV and Chromecast, Chrome TV, and Google Fiber, but they don't create content. So any thoughts on those platforms?
I don't know. So that's my new wet blanket firm. I am really concerned with Google's ability to manage such a disparate set of activities, especially when they don't think their shareholders need voting rights, right? Google's voting rights are so closely held, it's essentially like a dictatorship. And so when anyone opts in to a dictatorship, I sort of imagine they don't want their actions scrutinized. And I kind of summarily guess that the actions are not as good as they would be if Google subjected itself to the wisdom of the crowds and they allowed shareholders to actually intervene and object and engage. I think I'd have more faith in Google.
Great. Okay, another question about competitive platforms to Netflix. Could you comment more about Disney, Apple, and Amazon competitive advantages? Which one do you prefer as an investment, and which company has more upside and why?
Well, I will say I did buy a portfolio of my student stocks in the spring, and it paid for 1 year of college for my daughter and this beautiful new office I'm enjoying. So thank you if you're out there. That said, I definitely wouldn't put myself forward as a stock picker. That is not my comfort area. So what am I bullish on? Can you repeat the last part of the question, Laura?
Sure. So it was, I'm just pulling it back up. Could you comment more about Disney, Apple, and Amazon competitive advantages? Which one do you prefer as an investment? Which has more upside and why?
Okay. So Disney, so if you timed Disney, like on a, pick a day when they, kind of amp up the mask mandate, or more people get blood clots from a vaccine, et cetera. And then, maybe buy Disney on that day. The ceiling on Disney is constrained because it's a very competently run, very complicated company. It's in so many businesses. It's so asset heavy. It's so global that actually it has tremendous risk of somewhere in the world, something terrible happening at any one time. And so I would say you put Disney in your portfolio, because if Disney goes, we're all going, you know what I mean? So you just put that thing in there and you're like, look, at the point where this thing is crushed, I'm going to have much bigger problems. outside of saying that I don't see a tremendous amount of headroom, I think what I'm interested in at the moment, if I'm combing through the shrinking pool of publicly traded stocks that are out there, I'm just saying shrinking because, firms seem so interested in delisting. I think that the good ones have used COVID as an opportunity to shake down their operations. So I think the thing I'm really interested in, like, for instance, the Gap went up 340% over the past year because there's just so much opportunity to shake down not only their manufacturing, their in-store operations, their e-commerce game, their product selection. It's like everywhere they looked, there was an opportunity to unlock value. So right now, I think I'm interested in any company where you could make the case that as we kind of emerge from COVID, we're going to see they spent all of that time right.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next question is, what do you think the future of traditional cable is in light of the performance of Netflix and other streaming services? Do you think cable companies have any advantage given they are ISPs?
I feel like we might soon miss our cable bundle. It's super strange. But when you've got all these different line items on your credit card, it's like not all in one place, or you just like want to watch this one thing and you sign up for the free trial and you like promise to remember to cancel, but you don't cancel. And then that one thing you watched cost you $30. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw cable totally plateau at a reasonable penetration rate or even see some upward inflection. That would just not surprise me. I wouldn't count cable out. That might be another industry where aptly timed, you're gonna see those are some pretty good assets there for sure.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, another question here. Do you see any connections to the vertical integration model in terms of video gaming?
So are you talking, I'd have to understand more, but I presume you're thinking about Nintendo being integrated into the hardware versus gaming companies that are just standalone games?
I think that's what this person is getting at, yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm really bullish on Nintendo because Nintendo, I'm a little worried what happens when their CEO goes away. He seems to be sort of the heart and soul of the company. And so I think there's that point of vulnerability. But Nintendo definitely seems to know how to envision an experience and bring it to fruition. And I think their vertical integration is the reason they can do things that are like so exceptional and exceed our expectations. So the control over the customer experience is notably interested in gaming, and I'm bullish on Nintendo as long as they have such an inspired leader. And then on the other end of gaming, where we're talking about thousands of individual gamers, all sort of, it's sort of like the long tail in music. You get on YouTube and you get this sense everybody's got a single. So that's a really, really rugged end of the market. So to your point, I'd say you sort of pointed out these two extremes. On the one end, there's this vertically integrated model of Nintendo, and it's almost always a good to great experience. And then on the other end of the spectrum, yeah, it's so rugged. I can't imagine ever trying to pick a winner from that group. That looks like a pure lottery.
Excellent. Okay, well, we are at the 6 o'clock mark. Thank you
for coming, everyone.
This was really, really fantastic. Lots of terrific insights, lots of great questions from our attendees. So big thanks on behalf of the Alumni Relations Department for your time. And a big thank you to everyone who tuned in. As a reminder, this session was recorded, and so we will make it available along with all of our other reunion sessions in the coming weeks. And we hope to see you in person in the very near future for more alumni events. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.